Okay, probably not the best of local lighting conditions, but I figured that I'd have a bit of a talk about some of the aspects of making the raid. One of the more notable aspects, particularly the one which I'm talking about right now, was firing the rocket at the Prophet. The rocket scene in where I end up shooting the Kwarji Prophet was one that was quite difficult to pull off in order to make it so that you can actually see things all from the same perspective as the in real life camera. This meant that I'd have to try and be able to track all the geometry in the background as I moved. Unfortunately, while there's most likely a way in order to actually accurately track when a scene is moving, so that there's never any one object or part of a background that is going to be there for the entire thing that you can track in Mocha or any other method that you may use. While I may not know of any, I'm sure that there's bound to be some method out there. I ended up as such having to find an alternative. And for me, this ended up being doing the entire aspect of its perspective and pretty much almost all of the motion in 3ds Max, to the point that when I imported it, it could be pretty much directly overlaid right on to the actual video without having to be modified in any way. And this was an considerable challenge, but simply trying to actually come up with a method of which this would work took surprisingly not as long as I would have expected it. However, it's still something worth note. The actual method itself consisted of taking a camera, of which I would render this all through, attaching the background plane to that camera. This is in 3D Studio Max, by the way, in case you hadn't noticed. Attaching that by means of linking it. Now, this would make it so that when I applied a AVI texture, of which consists of that portion of the video that I needed, no matter where I go and look with the camera, I will always see effectively what would be happening then. In order then to actually get the Prophet and the missile to fire, I as such had to go and cue things up so they looked to scale and so they were in proportional positions, or however you would say that, to get that set up to the perspective of the camera and to make it so that it stays relative to the playing image or video in the background, or which is attached to the camera. I would not be able to simply make a fully realistic scene where the Prophet was over one section of a ditch of which the ditch itself would not be rendered, and then the rocket would simply be on its own and fire off from one side over towards him, allowing me to a great level of perspective, and everything would be done by Max itself. That is not an option given the method of which I'm taking, because if I'd taken that method, then it would have been almost impossible to accurately match up how everything looked when I combined the scenes. My own approach, which I ended up taking, consisted of instead using that background scene. I'd take the rocket and link it up to the perspective of the camera so that it moved with the hand. But then when the rocket was fired, it was, yes, moved up to the upper right corner a bit. However, since the scene itself in the background begins to move as well, the rocket then begins to be pulled back towards the center of the scene, of which can be relatively confusing without a visual example, of which I should be showing at the moment. This was somewhat unusual for me, since while I am pretty good at operating in a normal 3D environment, such as the normally which you will find in 3ds Max, trying to produce the following effects without truly going through stuff in 3D. The effect consists of shrinking objects and playing with their perspective, rotating them all slightly, but without actually moving them to the same extent that one would expect in order to make it appear that it was actually flying farther away from the camera, when in truth it effectively never leaving more than a 1 or 2 foot square box. The Prophet himself was originally just slightly off camera, and then I would slide him into the camera, at which point then I would yet again carefully animate him and adjust his positioning in order to stay to that of the scene in the background. Thus, when this was all imported in to After Effects CS5, things could be far more easily worked with than any of the other methods of which I was able to think of. The results turned out to be quite good, and with only some very minor editing in order to get things to just match up just right, as well as a bit of masking so that the rocket launcher was not on top of my hand like everything else, and the Prophet was behind a corner of the Arroyo drainage ditch, if you will. Beyond that, it was a very simple thing to import it. This will probably be coming to you in numerous sections chopped up in order to avoid multiple distractions and myself losing a train of thought. However, in the end, I hope that this was somewhat informative as to how, when you are attempting to produce an effect of your own, you have to try and think that you don't have to produce that effect identical as to how it should be. You can try and make any method of which will effectively fool a person or fool a 2D flat surface into thinking that things are actually occurring as they are, because when you look at something on a monitor, that's all it is, a 2D flat surface. Trying to think outside of the box is a skill of which is very useful, and whenever you can, just try and think of alternative ways, even if you don't need to. If you have a thought, pursue it. Alright, thank you for watching this behind the scenes and the making of the Raid video. Hopefully you found it informative, or at least entertaining to some extent. Continuing on, I hope that everybody here who is watching this goes on to try and produce as many cool and entertaining videos of their own as possible. I would enjoy also thanking, in assisting in the production of this, my teacher, Tim Samoff, at Moore Park College, for an extremely valuable experience, and also various other sources, such as, on YouTube, Corridor Digital, a great YouTube channel that do lots of good stuff. I recommend anyone who can check it out, as well as Freddie W, as well as his other channel, Freddie W2, for also having many similar videos and informative guides. Freddie W, his Freddie W2 channel, is the one of which holds most of the making of videos for his videos, which are mostly displayed on the first channel.